In 1981, the Southern steam program was lacking the primary element needed to operate steam passenger excursions, an operating steam locomotive. Southern's 4501, the workhorse of the steam program in the 1970s, was sitting in the Irondale, Alabama steam shop, awaiting repairs to a cracked flue sheet. Work continued on the recently leased Chesapeake and Ohio 2716, but her steam debut was not expected until the spring of '82, which left Southern FP7s shouldering the excursion workload. 1981 was also the year we purchased our first single-tube industrial camera, along with a new portable VHS recorder. This was quite state-of-the-art at the time, but rather primitive when compared to today's standards. Today's least expensive camcorders and VCRs have features that weren't even invented in 1981. Then, in 1987, our budget allowed us to make the leap to broadcast equipment, which was like going from night to day. Footage we shot prior to 1987 was packed into boxes and placed in storage in favor of the new broadcast footage we were now shooting. But since the demise of the steam program, we've been besieged with calls and letters requesting footage of this or that locomotive on this or that excursion. Thus, we began a search through our video memorabilia, some of which hadn't even been viewed since being shot. Even we were surprised at what we found. So, for the next hour and 20 minutes, we'd like you to join us as we rummage through our video memorabilia to bring you all good things. To begin, let's travel to Chattanooga, Tennessee in October of 1981 and ride along with the Southern 2716 as she makes her debut with the Southern Steam program. Built by Alco in 1943 for the C&O, this Kanawha Class 284 was leased to the Southern Railway by the Kentucky Railway Museum in 1979. Now, the Southern had never owned a 284 Berkshire, and there had been nothing on the Southern's locomotive roster that closely resembled the C&O's blunt-nose styling. What steamed out of Chattanooga that fall morning had a distinctly Southern appearance, and would later win Bill Purdy and his staff Model Railroader's prestigious Kit Bashing Award. Although there were grumblings from several camps as to the 2716's pseudo-Southern styling, there were no complaints about her mechanical performance. So let's go trackside, as the 2716 heads her 1981 excursion from Chattanooga to Emory Gap. Although the 2716 was a welcome addition to the Southern Steam program, mechanical problems seemed to plague the engine during her short tenure. There were constant problems related to the firebox. According to master mechanic Bill Purdy, the throat sheet developed so many cracks, the engine just wasn't safe to operate. Reluctantly, the 2716 was retired from the steam program in the summer of 1982, less than a year after being placed into service. Once again, the FP7s were called upon to fill the void, but an immediate search began for a locomotive to replace the 2716 for the remainder of the 1982 season. Now you might be asking yourself, why this urgent need for a replacement? But remember, this was 1982, and the first of the railroad mega mergers had just been proposed. The main players? Well, let's just say that both the Southern and the Norfolk and Western were not opposed to any publicity or public relations. By August of '82, the Norfolk and Western 611 made her debut with the excursion fleet. And with the addition of the 611, the Southern steam schedule had been expanded to operate 2 train sets. The 611 was to head up one phase of the schedule on the Norfolk and Western, while the 2716 operated over Southern rails, thus the need for a 2716 replacement. Help came from the Fort Wayne Historical Society in the form of the nickel plate 765. In October and November of 1982, the Lima-built Berkshire made her first tour south of the Mason-Dixon line over the Southern Railway system as the head-end power on trips out of Lexington, Chattanooga, and Atlanta. So now let's catch up with the 765 as she heads her 1982 excursion between Lexington and Chattanooga on the former Queen and Crescent route of the CNO and TP. While the 765 was making her debut in the Southland, Bill Purdy and his staff were trying to come up with ideas to fill the vacancy on the steam roster. A thorough examination of 2716 was made. The findings were disappointing. Basically, the 2716 needed a completely new firebox. The cost for this type of repair was not in the program's budget. The search for additional head-end power ended in the Irondale shops. Among the locomotives in storage awaiting their turn for repair were Southern's 4501 and 722, as well as the Savannah and Atlanta 750. After evaluating each of the locomotives, Bill Purdy and the mechanical crew focused their attention on the 750. The 82 season was coming to a close, and the 611 would be returning to Irondale for winter storage and routine maintenance. Work on the 750 began as soon as the 611 repairs were completed. At the beginning of the 1983 season, the 611 made her break-in run between Birmingham and Atlanta before heading toward Roanoke and another season on her home rails. Work on the 750 continued as the steam season moved into high gear. Once again, Southern's FP7s rose to the occasion for the first fan trips of 1983. On May 18th, the Savannah and Atlanta steamed into the 1980s with little or no fanfare in the person of engine number 750. In fact, rail photographer John Kraft and I were among the handful of rail fans who hung around all day while the engine crew made their final adjustments to the locomotive. Late that afternoon, the 750, along with an auxiliary tender, began a deadhead ferry move to Memphis. We shot the 750 several times in 1983, but while we were rummaging through our video memorabilia, we were surprised to find the footage included in this segment. No one on our staff remembered shooting the 750 on trips out of Atlanta that year. But our biggest shock was the cab footage shot from one of the assisting Fs. But there it was in my handwriting, S&A 750, Atlanta to Toccoa, November 5th and 6th, 1983. So now let's catch up with the 750 as she powers her 1983 Atlanta Autumn Leaves Special. One of the advantages of being in Atlanta is that we're only a little more than 2 hours from Birmingham and the Irondale steam shops. One of the advantages of working nights is that when Sarah Purdy calls you on Tuesday and says, "I just thought you might want to know that we'll be taking out 611 for a break-in run tomorrow," you can still go and get back in time for work. And if you're running a little late getting back, ask the boss if she wants to ride along. This was the case in April of 1984. I was working second shift at one of the area banks, and my supervisor, Darlene, was a closet rail fan. After work that night, we took off for Birmingham. Now, if you're lucky enough to have ever been along on one of the Southern steam break-in runs, you'll know that for the most part, the recently shopped locomotive usually runs light, slowly from Birmingham to Chattanooga the first day, and returns to Birmingham the following day with revenue freight. So you can imagine our surprise when 611 roared out of the Irondale yard at track speed with 28 revenue freight loads and a Southern caboose. We were lucky enough to chase the 611 to Valley Head that spring day, and yes, we did make it back for work on time. And Darlene still talks about the day she saw her first steam engine. As important as the steam locomotives were to the program, it would be unfair to downplay the role of Southern's FP7s. Between 1964 and the mid-1980s, the F units played a major part as backup and head-end power. As we mentioned earlier, the Fs were often used when mechanical problems sidetracked steam power. But as Bill Purdy pointed out in a 1991 interview with us, the excursion program was growing. More business meant the need for more powerful engines like 2716 and 611. The smaller engines like the 722 and the 750 just weren't designed to handle these longer trains. So until more suitable locomotives could be acquired, Southern relied on their fleet of aging Fs as replacement or auxiliary power for the smaller locomotives on the steam fleet roster. I'm sure that we will receive calls and letters for not making 4501 the first segment in this program. But please keep in mind that we're trying to chronicle the steam program from our first involvement to the final excursion. In order to do this, we must first establish all the major players. By 1985, the Norfolk Southern merger was a done deal. The new Norfolk Southern steam program continued to operate 2 train sets that crisscrossed the nation east of the Mississippi. From Buffalo to Jacksonville, St. Louis to Norfolk, the steam program grew each year. From such humble beginnings in 1964, when the Southern Railway acquired 3 aging steam locomotives, a dream was born. The dream was conceived by DuPont engineer Paul Merriman in 1963 when he purchased the K&T Railway's number 12, ex-Southern 4501, for $5,000. Together with associate Bob Sewell, they approached Southern Vice Presidents Macon Tollison and Graham Claytor for permission to move the K&T No. 12 to Chattanooga from Stearns, Kentucky. On June 6, 1964, the 4501, in a traditional black paint scheme, made the first ferry move from Stearns to Chattanooga. The rest, as they say, is history. One of our competitors has described the 611 as Queen of the Fleet. But for my money, as well as any Southern historian or steam program aficionado, Southern's 4501 always was and always will be the Queen of the Fleet. So without any further ado, let's join the Southern 4501 in the spring of 1985 as she provides the head-end power on fan trips from Chattanooga to Knoxville and return. While the 4501 was making her 1980s debut, the Norfolk Western 1218 was making a stealth move from Roanoke to Birmingham. On Thursday, May 23, 1985, the mighty Norfolk Western Articulated made the final leg of her journey to the Irondale shops. The trip from Atlanta was made behind a Norfolk Southern Jeep 30, number 2573, with the 1218, her rods removed, nestled between two pairs of hopper cars, with a Southern bay window caboose bringing up the rear. Once again, a midweek ferry move kept most of the rail fans at work. And to the best of our knowledge, this is the only known video footage of the ferry move out of Atlanta. The 1218 joined the Roanoke steam fleet in April of 1987 with a 3-day ferry move from Birmingham to Roanoke. The following weekend, the Roanoke-built Articulated made her inaugural excursions out of Roanoke with destinations of Bluefield, Lynchburg, and Walton. The following spring, the 1218 had the honor of powering the first steam excursion of the year between Birmingham and Chattanooga. So let's roll the calendar up to April of 1988 and travel to the Irondale Yard and catch some of the action as the 1218 heads her 23-car excursion train towards Chattanooga. when the 1218 joined the steam fleet in 1987, the principal players that shaped the steam program in the 1980s were all in place. Whether retired or in active service, each locomotive had made its own entry in the history of the program. By 1987, the Savannah and Atlanta 750 had already been returned to the Atlanta chapter of the NRHS. Both the 4501 and the 630 would soon be returned to the Tennessee Valley Railway Museum. But there were still some players to be introduced to the Norfolk Southern steam program as it headed toward the 1990s. Both the Southern and Norfolk Southern had always been somewhat reluctant to operate excursions with locomotives that were not maintained by the mechanical staff of the Irondale shops. Thus, locomotives like the Nickel Plate 765 and the Frisco 1522 were relegated to local excursions in their respective geographic areas. There were some exceptions to this no foreign power attitude, as evidenced in 1994, when the Frisco 1522 traveled to Atlanta for the annual NRHS convention. As the newly formed Norfolk Southern entered the mid-80s, equipment rosters were evaluated. The fleet of aging Southern F units was not in alignment with the direction the railroad was taking as it approached the 1990s. The remaining Fs were retired by the end of 1987, and new Norfolk Southern road diesels were now filling the backup power role for the steam program. The first appearance of NS diesels was in October of 1983, with GP38ACs number 4130 and 4131 fresh out of the NS paint shops, sporting the new Norfolk Southern paint scheme. 611 was in the Irondale shops for some unscheduled repairs, so the freshly painted Jeep 38s got the call as head-end power on excursions out of Roanoke to Bluefield and Glade Spring. So let's ride along with the 4130 and 4131 as they head their 1983 excursion over the former Norfolk and Western's Radford Division to Glade Spring. In 1991, another new face was added to the growing list of locomotives to operate with the Southern Norfolk Southern steam program. While last-minute repairs continued on the Norfolk and Western 1218 at the Irondale shops, the Atlanta and West Point 290 made a brief appearance with the steam program, with trips operated out of Birmingham and Jacksonville. Although the 290 did not make her official debut with the steam program until 1991, she was no stranger on Norfolk Southern tracks. Since 1989, the A&WP 290 had made several new Georgia excursions over NS with destinations of Brunswick, Savannah, and Macon, to name but a few. Though these trips were not on the, quote, steam schedule, they were nonetheless Norfolk Southern sponsored trips. So as we roll our calendar up to April of 1991, let's catch up with the 290 and the new Georgia Fs on a midweek ferry run from Birmingham to Macon over the former Central of Georgia. Through the years, we may have had more opportunities than most to record the history of the STEAM program. After all, a lot of this history was happening in our own backyard. If there are any regrets we have with our 14-year association with the program, it would be that we didn't make more trips than we did. So as we continue to rummage through our collection of video memorabilia, we'd like to show you some of our favorite footage. Let's begin with the 1218 in August of 1991 on a ferry trip between Portsmouth, Ohio and Canova, West Virginia. While the Frisco 1522 and the N&W 611 head their 1994 Peach Blossom Special towards Atlanta and the 1994 NRHS Convention, let's travel back to the summer of 1987 for a few highlights of that year's NRHS Convention. The Norfolk Western 611 has just stormed west through the West Roanoke Yard on her way to Radford. Somewhere ahead, waiting, was the 1218 with 49 hoppers and a caboose. The event was a side-by-side race up Christiansburg Mountain in a scene right out of the early 1950s. Each locomotive in its respective service operating over its home tracks. Who would win the battle for Christiansburg Mountain? Well, why don't you watch and see? As we continue through our video memorabilia in search of good things, let's travel to Salisbury, North Carolina, with the nickel plate 587 and the Norfolk and Western 1218 as they head west towards Asheville and the 1989 NRHS convention. When you mention North Carolina, visions of steam on Saluda are most people's first thoughts. But for my money, give me the loops at Old Fort any day. For me, it's the Christiansburg Mountain of the Carolinas, with a 12-mile climb up a 2% plus grade. Add in a half dozen or so tunnels and moderate accessibility, and you've got a railfan's dream. So let's catch up with the 587 and the 1218 as they do a little mountain railroading, Southern style. As we bring our convention coverage to a close, let's ride along with the 611 and 1522 again as they doublehead the second section of the 94 Nancy Hanks Special back to Atlanta during the 1994 NRHS convention. While the Nancy Hanks Special steams toward Atlanta, let's take another look at the Atlanta Chapter's 750 as she travels over the same Macon to Atlanta corridor in April of 1988. When we became weekend warriors back in 1981, I don't think anyone recognized the impact that the 2716 would have on the Southern Steam program. Over the years, we've been asked more about the 2716 than any other locomotive in our archives. She seemed to have a magical quality surrounding her that survives today. See what you think as we join the 2716 one last time as she powers her 1982 Dogwood Special from Atlanta to Toccoa. In 1991, the familiar Heritage Green and Gold paint scheme returned to the steam program in the form of Southern's 4501. Though limited to excursions in the southeast, the aging Mikado was entering her 80th year of service on the Southern and its successors. On June 29, 1991, the Southern 4501 steamed into the 1990s along the banks of the French Broad River between Asheville and Bulls Gap. Another Tennessee Valley Railway Museum alumnus made a brief appearance with the steam program in the 1990s. Due to mechanical problems, the 4501 was on again, off again during the 1991 and 92 seasons. More often than not, TVRM's number 610 filled in for the aging Southern Mike. Here she is seen on TVRM property shortly after returning from a 1991 excursion to Huntsville. As we said earlier in the program, the Atlanta and West Point 290 was no stranger on Norfolk Southern rails, but she made only a few trips under the banner of the Norfolk Southern Steam Program. One of these trips was in April of 1991 along the Norfolk Southern Alabama division between Birmingham and Chattanooga. While the 290 steams south out of Attala, Alabama, let's head back to the 1989 NRHS convention in Asheville for one last look at the nickel plate 587. Along with the TVRM 610 and the A&WP 290, this nickel plate Mikado made only a brief appearance with the steam program, but left her mark nonetheless. Here she powers an 89 convention special along the French Broad River on her way to Newport. When it came to selecting the 4501 segments for All Good Things, the choices weren't that difficult to make. For us, the 1985 season allowed the 4501 to show the stuff that made her famous. This was a time before the business end demanded 25-car excursions and calculated break-even points. This was a time when weekend steam was still more fun than business. I don't think I'll ever forget being near Tazewell, where you could hear the 4501 struggling up the grade for a full 5 minutes before she crested the top. So for now, we'll turn things over to 4501 and the Tazewell scene. It's the last shot in this segment. While it was easy for us to select the 4501 segments, we agonized over 611. Our archives contain miles and miles of 611 video memorabilia. As we reviewed the dozen or so tapes being considered, 2 tapes kept getting shoved back into the VCR. We viewed really great pacing in Asheville, and we watched 611 climb Saluda more than I care to admit. But the same 2 tapes still kept being shoved back into the VCR. They're both presented in this program, and both are of break-in ferry runs with freight consists. So let's go trackside with the 611 in the spring of 1983 as she traveled the high iron between Birmingham and Atlanta. For the Norfolk and Western 1218, the first trips in '87 were an utter nightmare. Freshly outshopped in the Irondale shops, she began a 3-day ferry move back to Roanoke. 40 miles out of Birmingham, a rod brass ran hot, resulting in an overnight stay in Anniston. Next, the generator on the business car, Clater Lake, caught fire, not once, but twice, first in Atlanta and again in Bluefield. The nightmare continued on the inaugural trip to Bluefield when the train was nearly turned back at Glen Lynn because of a landslide with downed trees blocking the right-of-way. The delays continued when the signals from Narrows to Bluefield went out. Despite all of the problems, the trip to Bluefield with 1218 still brings back fond memories. (1992) marked the diamond anniversary of the Southern and Norfolk Southern steam program. The 25th anniversary celebration was held in November at Chattanooga, Tennessee, the birthplace of the program. Rail fans from around the world crowded into the Chattanooga Choo-Choo Complex, either to ride into railroad history or look on while history was being made. The festivities included a triple-headed excursion from Chattanooga to Ottawa Junction. The 25th anniversary special steamed out of town with the 4501 on the point, followed by 611 and 1218 respectively. At Ottawa, the train was split into two sections. The 4501 and her short consist continued on to Cleveland, Tennessee, before heading back to Chattanooga. While the 4501 climbed out of the Tennessee River Valley on the main line to Knoxville, the 611 and 1218 began their afternoon's long trip back to Atlanta. On June 6, 1964, the first Southern Steam Special left Stearns, Kentucky, headed for Chattanooga, Tennessee. It was powered by Southern 4501, painted black in a typical Southern freight scheme. The consist was small, with sleeper Shenandoah Valley, Southern Gondola 117852, and office car number 6. On December 3, 1994, 30 years, 5 months, and 28 days later, the Norfolk and Western 611 powered the last Norfolk Southern Steam Special from Birmingham to Chattanooga and return. The consist was much larger in 1994, with an auxiliary tender, tool car, and 24 coaches. In 1964, there were only a handful of people to witness 1960s steam. In 1994, crowds gathered at nearly every crossing to witness the end of an era. Although there were several contributing factors which led to the end of the program, the official Norfolk Southern position was that steam did not lend itself to the efficient operations of a modern railroad in the 1990s. Please don't tell anyone at Union Pacific. You could speculate the reasons that led to the demise of the steam program, but it wouldn't change the fact that on December 3rd, 1994, Norfolk Southern operated its last company-sponsored steam special. With that in mind, let's catch up with the 611 as she takes the high iron one last time. After steaming through Springville and Whitney Junction, the 611 made one last stop at Attala to pick up passengers for the last 87 miles of the northbound run to Chattanooga. At Rising Fawn, Georgia, a crowd gathered to watch as the 611 climbed the 1% grade one final time. At North Tunnel, the 611 emerged from the base of Lookout Mountain and began her final descent into Chattanooga.
Here he comes.
The 611 was welcomed to Chattanooga by a meet with the Tennessee Valley 610 and a crowd of rail fans from around the country. After maneuvering through the crossover at CT Tower, the 611 began her reverse movement into the Chattanooga Choo-Choo Complex. When the passengers had detrained for the layover in Chattanooga, the 611 was cut from the train and moved through the north leg of the Y for another meet with the Tennessee Valley 610. There were two familiar faces in the crowd of rail fans on that rainy December day in Chattanooga. James Beistlein and Carl Jensen, the past and present managing directors of the steam program, were on hand for the farewell festivities. Together, they represented nearly 30 years of Norfolk Southern steam, and it seemed only fitting that they were on hand to oversee the end of an era. While the crew of the 611 start their preparations for the return trip to Birmingham, we'd like to say thanks for riding along for all good things, and a special thanks for all of your support over the last 14 years. And although Norfolk Southern has dropped their fires for the last time, steam lives, and we look forward to bringing you more weekend steam in the years to come. Thanks again.